I'm Kimberly C. Paul. As I travel throughout each state, I realize that death is just a moment. It is how we live until that moment that matters. Finding connection with friends, family, and complete strangers. Journey with me. This is the Live Well, Die Well Tour. I want to welcome you, Gabby, to the podcast. What I love about talking to people like yourself is that you are very similar to me. You're an author, you're an advocate, you're a blogger, but you also live in two different worlds. You are a warrior in the end-of-life field because you are actually a hospice nurse, and that's your full-time job on a daily basis. And that's I tell people I was raised by hospice nurses because they're like, you talk like a nurse. I'm like, only because I was raised by them. But what I have found out doing a little research on you is that we have so much in common. I mean, I didn't want to be in the end of life field or hospice, and it sort of came to me. And you started off with a different career. And I wanted you to share your story because I think it's a freaking phenomenal story.
This is definitely the last job I would have ever thought I would do, for sure. I've been in commercial real estate most of my life, managing commercial properties, and then moved from there into safety on steel construction sites, which was a lot of work and a lot of information and sometimes a little scary, but it was where I was planted firmly and felt that that's where I would be forever. And then and I was laid off. And at the time, my friend's husband, who was one of my closest friends, was very sick and dying, and she needed to continue to work. So she asked me if I would come and stay with her and him and help take care of him. So, of course, I would do anything for them. So I went to Las Vegas for a little while and I stayed with them, and I slept in the twin bed next to his, and I helped him get up, and I helped him bathe, and I helped feed him, and I sat with him and I talked to him, and I was helping my friend. But I would watch these hospice people come in, and I thought, at that time, I don't like the term now, but at the time I truly believed that they were angels. I don't think of us as angels, but I do get why people think that, because I felt that about them. And I knew that I wanted to do something like that. And so after he passed away, I went to school to be a CNA and then a home health aide, and I became a caregiver, and I sat at the bedside of mostly elderly. And I was a companion, I was their friend. I learned so much from them about life and love and relationships and family. And then I had my first patient die. And I think that's the first time I ever really cried at a death, even though I had many, many deaths prior to that. It was the first time I got it, like what end of life is and how fragile life is. And I felt such deep loss. And I decided to go back to school in 40-something and become a hospice nurse. Not a nurse. I wanted to be a hospice nurse. So I went back to school, and it was really gosh darn hard. Oh my God. The fact that I made it blows my mind.
I'm sure you were there with all of these 20-year-olds and the generation gap. What were you thinking?
Well, I wanted to smack them and put them in the corner and give them a timeout. They were awful. Oh my gosh, they were so awful and so bratty and cliquey. And here I wanted to mother bear them and like, you guys, let's all study together, And, yeah. So I was on my own for the most part. It was really rough. And they did really thoughtless things. Like if a patient smelled bad, they'd plug their nose. And there was just some really rude, immature behaviors, which I think isn't necessarily taught in nursing school. I think it's a human behavior to be kind to others, and some people don't have it. I don't think some of them had it. Some of them did, and they were lovely, but it was really hard. It was hard being one of the oldest ones in the class.
I bet even having the experience, and you know what? I have met some great nurses, and they probably have never been a CNA. But when I meet a nurse, and by the way they talk, I can tell they were a CNA first.
I could see requirement.
Yeah, there's something different about them. There's just something. They're never above anything. They're in it for so much more than just being a nurse. It's almost like they're like, well, I'm human too. I don't know what it is. But I've always fallen in love with those who had started off as CNAs and graduated up to LPNs, if they're even around anymore, to RNs. They hold a special place in my heart.
I think it's important to start as a CNA or home health aide simply to understand what it's like to lay in that bed. And I think that's really important. I was managing our hospice house for a while, and the way that I trained our home health aides was I had them lie in the bed. And I said, close your eyes. I'm going to move a pillow out from under your head, but not tell you. I'm going to shut a light on without telling you. I'm going to raise and lower the bed without telling you. How does that feel? And they, right now, I get to still, because I still work with some of them, I watch how they are, and they're gentle and they're kind. And if they decide to go to nursing school, they would be incredibly great nurses.
Absolutely. I totally get it. I get it. You're talking to a middle child. My older sister's a nurse and my younger brother is a nurse, but my father calls me. I'm really close to my father, and he's going through some health issues, and he's like, if someone needs to come take care of me, you're going to do it, right? I'm like, yes, I will. He goes, they think they know too much. I'm like, no.
I get that.
Yeah. But they're always advocating because they see, as well as I being in hospice for 17 years, they see the red tape and the hoops that are so unfamiliar to those who are just first diagnosed with a serious illness. And so they want to protect him. And I'm always the kind of person like, Dad, if you do this, this is going to happen. He goes, yes. And so, you forget that your father is a little bit older and wiser than you are. And he's still an adult and can take care of himself. But my sister and brother, they're really, they're nurses to the core. But hey, what was interesting when I was doing a little bit of research is that you were exposed to death at a very young age, just like me. And I never thought about that exposure until years later as I was getting involved with hospice care, but how much of an impact that I ended up being exactly where I needed to be. But tell me about your exposure, and are you surprised that it had are you surprised that exposure kind of influenced what you're doing today?
So the truth is, I didn't really remember it until I started working on the second book, because the second book started out as this, like it was there all along. I just didn't know it. I was probably 7-ish, I think, and I heard the crash. I went out to where the crash happened. It was a gentleman on a motorcycle. In writing about it, it all came back to me. And I didn't carry that with me through my years. But when I started writing about it, I realized it's always been there, if that makes sense.
You're talking to a writer, which, yes, that totally makes sense to me.
I carried him with me, and I put his head in my lap, and I just kept rubbing his head. And now I'm a 7-year-old, right? And I kept wondering, where are his parents? Why isn't there anyone here? But the one thing I remember saying to him is you're going to be okay. I'm right here. I got you, which is what I say now. And so was I a hospice nurse then? Certainly in training,
I'm sure.
right? And then all the years that led up to now, all the little things, those little glimpses makes me realize that I was meant to do this. I just didn't know it.
Mm. Wow. You mentioned your second book. Let's talk about your two books. Tell me a little bit about your first one and then tell me about the second one. And I'm sure you got a third one coming.
I do. So the first one is called Soft Landing because I always strive to make the landing soft. It's about, so the reason I wrote the first book, my hope was that I could inspire people my age to not think that they aren't worthy of bigger and better, and to not give up, and to get over those hurdles and obstacles and not let them get in the way, because nursing school was really hard for me. And I almost failed it multiple times. And I almost didn't become a nurse because it was really hard for me. And I had a really difficult time. And so I wanted to write the book to say, it was awful. It was hard. I beat myself up, but look what I have now, look what I get to do, because I don't want people to think that at a certain age, you have to stop shooting for the stars. I say shoot for them always. And so I wrote it with that in mind, and all the obstacles that got me there. And then I had started writing the blog because as a hospice nurse, things that I learned, initially when I was working in our hospice house, I was very selfish and I thought those were my patients. And so the lessons that I learned early on was how important the team was in hospice, how important each person in that role was, and the contribution that they gave to the families and the patient. But also I realized that when I walk away, someone else is going to sit at that bedside, whether it's a volunteer, a home health aide, a caregiver, or a family member. And I realized that I needed to take myself out of the equation a little bit, but hand them the tools. So when I walked away, they could take it and move forward with it. So I started writing the blog kind of in with Soft Landing to encourage people to take my tools and feel confident at the bedside. So Soft Landing was my struggle and my lessons.
I love it.
It was good. It felt good to write it.
And your second book?
Second book is The Hospice Heart, which is what I call the Hospice Heart Facebook page. And that was about kind of carrying on the blogs as well to continue the gifts. I want to keep handing out all the stuff that gets handed to me. And in writing it, I started realizing that there was all these things that happened throughout my life that led me there. And so that was an add to the book. That wasn't where it was supposed to go. The Hospice Heart kind of took a tailwind onto Soft Landing and saying, look, it was there all along. Like, I don't know if you read it, but there's a story I write called Cemetery Girl. So I used to hang out at the cemetery. I would walk, I don't know how many miles. Back then it didn't seem like miles, and I would hang out at the cemetery and I would sit at the stones and I would blow bubbles and eat peanut butter and jelly. And I would imagine the lives that the people underground lived before they died. And it sort of inspired me and it makes me think about now, because what I learned the most in the work that we do is to live this life, to live it big and great and wonderful, because you only really get one chance. And I think that Cemetery Girl expresses that. So that's what that book is about.
So, I'm a little confused here because you are working full time as a hospice nurse, and which I know because like I said earlier, I was raised by hospice nurses. I see sometimes that the work-life balance is difficult for hospice nurses, but yet, what do you find? Because you must find something to write about this, to blog about this, to create a community on Facebook. Why do you feel called to do that as well? And that's also what we have in common, because my friends, they're just like, how can you accomplish so much? And I'm like, I think I just something inside of me, I just feel like I must do it. And if I've got one life to hit, a base hit, and I'm just hoping that I can get on base, to live a good life. So do you have tell me a little bit about what inspires you at the end of a full-time job, somewhat an emotional, compassion fatigued, a lot of our coworkers are, to you to come home and inspire other warriors to keep going?
That's a really great question because so when I shut the door after I've either held a wife who said goodbye to her husband, or told a husband that she doesn't have much time left, or talked to children about those things that you gotta say. When I close that door and walk out to my car, a lot happens to me. I cry. I cry a lot, and I feel. And each time I experience those things, I think I can't be alone. Someone else must feel this. And I guess what I want to do is I want to remind people that they're not alone. So I started the Hospice Heart Facebook page because I wanted to kind of build a community, maybe a safe place where people could feel, whether they are hospice workers, whether they're a wife who lost her husband, whether they're children that are having to say goodbye, or whether they're patients themselves who need to understand what's going on. I wanted to, it's a little selfish because where I was creating it for them, I was really creating it for me because I needed a place to talk about what I do. And how I feel when I do it, because people don't ask me how my day is because they're afraid I'm going to tell them.
It's so true.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
so I want to talk about the work we do because I think it's amazing. And there's not a lot of places that I get to do it. So I decided I was going to create it myself. And it's taken on a life of its own. And it's a beautiful place to feel the feels. And some days are harder than others, but that's where I get to go. And now I can throw something out there saying, I'm having a really rough day. And someone will say, oh my gosh, me too. And they'll offer me hugs, or I'll say, how are you guys feeling today? Let's talk a little bit about your grief. Let's walk you through that, and so some days it's not about me, but the truth is that page is all about all that stuff that swirls around inside me that sometimes doesn't have a place to go.
I love it. So basically, it's you on a page, which I believe is present, authentic, and very vulnerable. And we're so desperate for people like you right now in a world that we're social distancing, where we can't be with loved ones when they're in the hospital. But this has been our world for a long time, you and I, within hospice. A lot of people turn their heads away. They don't know what to say, so they don't say anything, which half the time you don't have to say anything. You just have to freaking show up. And just be like, this sucks, but I'm here. And I have no clue what to say next. And just be you. Have you found that once you start telling your story, it sort of gives other people permission to be like, thank God, yes, I feel the same way?
I think people in our line of work, especially, I think they want to share their story because I think about what I see and the lives that I'm invited into and the lessons I learn, whether it's about love or family or culture or faith. Oh my gosh, I am exposed to so much different faith and tradition and commitment to a spiritual practice that I think is amazing. People always say, thank you for being here for us. I want to say, no, thank you for what you're giving me. So if I see it, imagine what everybody else in this line of work sees and feels and experiences. We must be bursting to share it because I am. We see, people think we see death, but we see life.
Oh, gosh, we could bottle that up and sell it, because a lot of people, when I tell them about my personal experience in my hospice, their shoulders kind of drop. especially if I'm traveling for a speaking engagement and they're like, so what do you do? And I'm like, how can I play this? I work for hospice. And they're like, oh, yeah. And, that's going to the event. And on the way back, they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, I work for hospice. Want some? And they're just like, I don't want any of that. But I'm just impressed that they know what hospice is. Because I'm in love with hospice. I'm in love with Dame Cicely Saunders and why she even created or had the vision to do something that I could participate in and actually feel whole again, wholehearted again. But our field called hospice has gone through so many changes. And the one thing that I, as a senior leader within a hospice organization, is as we grew as an organization, and I say that as we serve more and more people, we tended to leave the staff behind and not take care of them. And I think when I left my organization, whether I said it to anyone or even myself as I drove away for the last day, I was thinking, I will never leave hospice staff again behind. I can't. So whatever I do moving forward, it has to include hospice staff and how we take care of them. And you, as well as you, I say that very selfishly because I want people like you at my dad's bedside and my bed. And I see some of our colleagues leaving this field when they were born to be in it because of this thing called compassion fatigue. And so what do we, you and me, you created this platform, but how else can we contribute as a hospice organization or just even individuals or friends for people working in hospice? How can we support the staff in simple ways, internal and external?
So for work-wise, I think it's really important to feel, and I use this word a lot, but safe, being able to share with someone in your work, your manager, your higher ups or whatever, and be able to say, I'm having a tough day, without them thinking, oh gosh, she's going to take time off, or we're going to have to get PTO, or we're going to have, and I want to know that I can.
Who's going to see her patients?
Right? And I need to know that I can do that. But when I see some of our nurses having a tough time, I don't do it to all of them. But if I feel it, I'll reach out and just go, hey, how you doing? Or if I know that one of their patients passed and I'll read about it, I'll send them a little red heart and just go, hey, you did a really great job with her.
Oh, wow.
Because I think we are so busy and we're so wrapped up giving all of ourselves to someone who is dying, we forget to give it to each other, and we can't do that. We have to lift each other up. And that might sound a little bit whatever, but it's the truth. I want my team that I get to work with, who I'm honored to work with, I want them to know the beautiful work that they do, and that it's okay to cry some days, and it's okay to say, I don't know if I can do this much longer. And it's okay to break down and just feel that grief, because it is grief. And if you don't feel it, it bottles up, and the pain and the ache is heavier and heavier and heavier. I would like to think that people make themselves a safe place and the environment a safe place where you are not questioned. Your ability isn't questioned because you are having a tough day.
I love that. And just because we in the field of end of life, we experience and feel loss a lot. But when it comes to our own inner personal circle, we're just like everyone else. Just because, that hospice experience there, I've seen many times that I have acted like I've never had one day of hospice experience when it came to, my loved ones, or they either, saw me as a little pigtail and braces girl still. And they're like, yeah, you don't know nothing. So it's like, it's really interesting how we can still feel differently as a family member or a close friend versus the exposure we have to our hospice patients. When I was writing my book, Bridging the Gap, I loved
you.
Oh, thanks. You're awesome. I love you. And you know what? I've decided right now that I have to die before you because I want you to be my hospice nurse.
I decided you can't die because I want to keep you forever.
But when I was writing my book, I did not do a lot of socializing for 4 months, and I cried and cried. And I had a friend who was a nurse within hospice that came over, kind of a chaplain. Her husband was a pastor, but she came over, and I said, I can't stop crying. And she softly patted my knee, and she goes, that's grief. And I'm like, oh, yeah, am I finally grieving all these people that have entered my life, and I never stopped to realize the full impact? And that's when I learned that probably one of the greatest lessons that I've learned from the dying is that time is not measured by length, it's measured by depth. That someone can enter your life and be there for 2 days, but the impact, the depth of the relationship can be so rich that it can be almost like losing some part of you. What is your experience? I mean, we're not robots. We can't cut off our emotions. Just like Brene Brown says, if you're going to feel love, you got to feel sad. I mean, you can't selectively, numb out to one feeling or the next. You got to feel it all or nothing. So how do you do that? And how do you help your colleagues, maintain that work-life balance?
Well, if you know me at all, I feel things and I don't hold back. When I'm having a tough day, most of the time, it. Sometimes I kind of keep to myself. I think you have to find the people that you're able to reach out to talk about it. For me, it's writing. Writing always helps me. Writing, the blog helps me. Writing on the Facebook page helps me because those.
Do you journal as well?
No. See, I never have been. I don't want to write about and so today I'm on the tour. No, I want to. I can only write about something specific that touched me. And it could be on all extremes, angered me, disappointed me, saddened me. For my colleagues, I think what I try to do is I try to remind them of their value and how beautiful and lovely they are. Because I think when you are reminded that, you can go back to why you're doing what you're doing. And when you're in hospice specifically, we are at the bedside of people who are dying, with people who love them and have to say goodbye. And that is a very emotional type of work. And so if you're doing it, I have to believe your heart is a compassionate heart. And if I feel like I might see someone that I work with that is struggling in some way or maybe kind of lost that, I remind them, because we are so unique and we all bring something different. And I do think I am good at what I do, but I am not all of it. I think our other nurses, our other home health aides, our volunteers, they bring magic and love and beauty and amazing gifts to the transitions that our patients and families go through. So I want to remind them of their gifts. So if I can do anything for them, it is to tell them not to forget why they're doing what they're doing. But also not to punish themselves if they feel the need to stop. It's okay. What's not okay is to keep going when you want to stop. Like maybe know your limits and take a moment to refresh.
I love that. I love that. That is ingrained in me of how can I help hospice leaders in the world of Medicare regulations really take care of those taking care of the dying, which are our staff, and make the leadership in our hospice organization realize their only goal is staff. Because when you hire people, you hire the right people that have the heart and the head, but you can teach skill. You can't teach compassion. You can't teach to show up and not say anything. If anyone would lean back, whether they work for a hospice organization or even a family member, the CNAs, the people who they taught me so much about caring for the smallest details of brushing,
a dry mouth.
Brushing their hair, knowing that the patient every day would put on lipstick. And even though she wasn't able to do that, they did it to help her.
Fix her hair because she's so vain, and that would make her happy.
Yes. I mean, if everyone loved like CNAs, I wonder what the world would be like.
Gentler, kinder. The other thing I was thinking about, that question you just asked, another thing that I think is really important is, our nurses, our all of us actually, they're all very they've got a big caseload, and it's very easy to walk into one home or a facility with the idea that you have 3 more to see after. I think the most important thing, if I could give anyone advice on how to do this better, is to leave your watch in the car. And that's figuratively, not necessarily, but turn your phone off. When you go into someone's home, let's say it's a home, you go into their home, yes, you've got things you have to do after, but at that time, they don't get a do-over, right? They're dying right then. Their wife is watching them, their daughter is watching them, their husband is watching them. This is their experience. We need to go in there so fully present and so on point with them that we're not looking at our watch and saying okay, I can only be here for 30 minutes. This is a dying experience. This is the last time this is ever going to happen for any of them. The best and most important thing we can do is stop time for them and be fully present. And I think that would change the way that we are at the bedside. And you brought up the caregivers, the CNAs, the caregivers, the home health aides. When they're washing a patient's hair, they're not thinking about the next patient. They're thinking about washing their hair and making sure they have a clean shirt on and the sheets are clean and that they're comfortable. If we had that mindset, imagine how better those last moments could be for someone. We're someone's last best moment. What can we do to make it just a little kinder?
I totally agree. And I often joke, because being part of leadership, I would be with some hospice nurses and they would be so present because, you got to document at the time in front of the patient. And they would leave their computers in their trunk and document for 20 or 30 minutes out in the driveway. And I asked one nurse, I'm like, yeah, but aren't you supposed to document in front of the patient? And she goes, some things I will never put in between me and the patient and family. And I was like, oh, you're a rebel. She goes, for a cause.
Oh, I like that.
For a cause. Only for a cause.
What does that mean when you sit there in your phone? The people with the watch phones, and they're constantly looking. Don't do that. This isn't about you.
Yeah. And I know that those who do have felt the pressure from leadership or their bosses but I love those nurses that are like, look, I'm here for the patients and families and I'm going to get the job done. And this is where, I am really trying to work with individuals who might have an impact when it comes to these regulations. We have got to have some flexibility for professionals because the end of life field and the dying is different than ICU. It's different than, me breaking an arm and going to the ER. It's different. And so we have to practice different. It's outside of the medical model. So how do we do that differently, but also have standards? I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I know that I've struggled only because I've seen our chaplains and our social workers, volunteers even, and doctors and CNAs just struggle with trying to be present, but also
follow the rules.
And
how can you do it with a little room to move,
to navigate in? Because I want a nurse that doesn't want to follow the rules at the bedside of my father. That if I'm alone in and they feel like I'm just going to sit here for 20 more minutes. I want them to have that gift of time to give me, but also give themselves, because it is a human impulse to want to be present, and especially when it comes to a dying patient. You know the other thing we have in common, which I love, is that, and I know you worked hard for your degree and being a nurse, but I see you bringing so much more creativity than the average nurse to your role. And I believe that, is it because you came into this at an older age and went through that CNA kind of viewpoint before you becoming a nurse? Because you look at it, you're with patients and doing is following the rules, let's just say, as best you can to be present at the bedside of the dying. But then you come home with this whole creative outlet that it's almost like left, right brain really balanced. It's really interesting, but I love when I see creativity being brought to such what seems to be from the outside, a black and white subject, because I think death is very colorful.
For sure.
So talk to me about your next book. What are you working on?
So it's kind of in process because I keep changing my way. And you know what it's about? It's, I can't tell you the name yet because
that's okay.
Right there yet, but it's about, it's kind of an accumulation of it all. And it's my thoughts about death and what it must be like to die. And as human beings, how can we live a fuller, better, more authentic, kinder life, knowing that we're going to die? What could we do differently? How can we, it's kind of like, it's living a life that dictates how you want to die. So being kind, being thoughtful, vocalizing, talking with one another, like the whole conversation thing, right? Like, I want to talk to my family now. They know what I want. They know how I want to listen to Tom Petty I want them to listen to Tom Petty when I die. They know what I want to wear. I want to live a life that is celebratory and full of magic and beauty and laughter and silly and play. And so the book is about not waiting for the bedside or that last breath to suddenly realize you didn't live your life. I want to live my life. And maybe by reading it will remind people to stop being so darn stagnant.
I guess it's been over 10 years ago, I went to Fiji. And, you don't go to Fiji every day, especially if you live on the east coast of North Carolina. But I went there for like 10 or 12 days, and I found myself in Fiji just getting up early and going to bed late and seeing the beauty of Fiji. And when I came back to North Carolina, I needed a vacation from my vacation kind of thing. I was so exhausted. And I said to myself, I'm like, why did I push myself so much on being in Fiji? And I was like, well, I might not ever see it again. And I knew it was going to end. And I was thinking, why am I not running with my hair on fire every day? Because my life will end one day. And that whole philosophy, in small ways, I mean, my dad really does hate advanced care planning because I'm, in Fiji swimming with sharks. And he's like, ever since you started talking about planning for your end of life, you're now doing things more boldly. And I said, I know, isn't that great? That if I would have died in Fiji, things would have been done and you knew what to do. And it does give me a new lease on being present. For instance, the last 2.5 years I've been in this RV and I don't have a dishwasher, and I hate washing dishes. So every time I get up to wash dishes, I think of my friend who's in a wheelchair and can't walk. And if I was in a wheelchair and couldn't walk, what pleasure I would have to stand up and wash dishes. And so I try to find simple pleasures that I'm fortunate to have. And I think that's where you and I connect is because you see the beauty in a lot of things where people see darkness. And I feel like I want to die well. And if I want to die well, I must live well, right? I must live well. And, it's funny because people will be like, you're so happy or you're so this. I'm just like, well, I'm never going to have, September 10th, 2020 again. And I can project all this shit out there, or I can be part of just saying, you know what? I can only do what I can.
And it's not about going bungee jumping or challenging yourself, although that's good for some people.
I'll tell my dad that.
For me, it's about loving fiercely. And the people that are in my life feel fiercely loved. And I want to laugh out loud to the point that I spit on, well, maybe not now because of COVID, but you know what I mean?
Right.
I want to giggle out loud at silly things. I want to let my granddaughters put things in my hair and get, the other night, my granddaughters FaceTime me. They do this all the time. And my oldest one says, Nana, do you want to play Candyland? And I said, how are we going to play Candyland? She goes, oh, Nana. And she lays out the Candyland, right? And she moved for me and we're playing Candyland on FaceTime. And the whole time I'm watching this with a glass of wine in hand, and I'm thinking, this is my life and this is so spot on. Like, this is perfect. And then all of a sudden she jumps up and she says, Nana, you won. And I did? Like, how did I win? And she goes, Nana, look. And she lifts up the Candyland thing to show me. Of course, everything falls off of it. But I thought, boy, is she right. I won.
Oh, that's so true. That's so true.
And I feel lucky and I feel very blessed. And I don't take that for granted.
Well, you know what? I feel blessed. I feel blessed that I've had this time with you today in the midst of you heading out the door to see another patient. I feel blessed of how much your work has helped me and knowing that I'm fighting for something that means more than just, helping people die. Yeah, more than just a job.
Not just a job.
It isn't. And I'm just so grateful to have your friendship. And I hope that we become, lifelong friends. And honestly, if I ever get diagnosed with anything and you're still a hospice nurse, I told Jessica Zeter, I don't know about anything, but I know that dying in San Francisco, it must be a good thing because there's some really great people out there and you're close to that.
I love Jessica.
I know. She's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Look, thank you so much. You're a gift to me and other people on your page. If you're listening, check out her Facebook page. What's it called again? Heart to Heart?
Called the Hospice Heart.
The Hospice Heart. It's a community of hospice workers, families who've experienced some of these things and can create a community to just relate and really have that space. But you and I also have a new project that we're working on that we have to mention because Michelle Little would not be my friend if I didn't, because she's been working her ass off on it. It's called Beautiful Dying Expo. It's going to be happening in November, and you can absolutely visit beautifuldyingexpo.com to learn more about it. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of chat about what your involvement with the expo will be, as well as you've been doing a lot of insights on live Facebook, educating people, giving your gift of your tools, how you cope and deal with hospice patients, and see them as a gift, and not really deal with them, but see them as a gift in your life. So what are you doing with the expo?
So I am one of the collaborators, and I am working on the team of end of life care. So we are creating speakers, panelists to talk about the different parts of end of life care and what that means. We're coming from a couple different places. We're We're hoping to get social workers and chaplains combined to talk about the spiritual, emotional side of death and loss and grief. We're also, we're involving pediatric side of death, how difficult that is to navigate. And we've got some great people that are going to speak. The information that is going to be available is going to be so worth the price of admission. You can pay for 1 day, you can pay for 3 days. You get to listen to people talk about things in little intimate groups. And the information will be incredible. It'll be valuable. It'll be incredibly personal. And you will meet some pretty amazing people who are sharing their gifts. And I'm super honored to be a part of it. I was a part of the one last year. And like you said, Michelle Little is working her ass off.
Yeah, she is.
It shows. It's going to be a great event.
Well, and get this, people, this event's going to be virtual. So you can sit at your desk. And I've been to many conferences in my life, personal as well as virtual. I'm even ashamed to tell you how cheap this conference is, where you're going to get exposed to Gabby, and I have the pleasure of hosting this event during these days and meeting and seeing the speakers engage with whoever shows up. But I believe it's only like $199 for a 3-day event. And it's nonsensical not to do it, because there's so many people and collaborative ideas that are happening that we could really come together and start taking care of one another. So check it out, beautifuldianeexpo.com. It's in November. I don't have the dates right in front of me. Do you?
13, 14, 15.
13th, 14th, and 15th, which November is National Hospice and Palliative Care Month. So it's just a way it's really cheap for even some of these hospices to allow CNAs to come to it as well. So this might be an opportunity for those who rarely get to do some out-of-the-box conferencing to come and participate. And I again, beautifuldianeexpo.com. And I guess I'll see you over the Zoom calls coming up. And I'm really happy to be, collaborating with you and supporting Michelle, as she is an amazing, amazing person. And she lost, I know we're recording this on September 10th. It won't be airing tomorrow, but on the eve of Michelle's brother, who was killed on 9/11 in New York. So I have to mention that, because her brother has inspired her to really do some amazing things with helping people look at grief, talk about advanced care planning, and plan for end of life. So I look forward to seeing you then. Gabby, I love you. I mean, I just think you're amazing, and I think your organization is a wonderful organization to have you on board. And if there's anything I can do to support you, this new book coming out, please don't hesitate to ask. And I look forward to seeing you in November at the Beautiful Diane Expo.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. This has been as fun as I hoped it would
be. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, you're the designer. This podcast is produced by Jason Andre with 7 Season Films.